Oscar Piastri is going through the worst stretch of his Formula One season at exactly the wrong time. And what looked like a comfortable championship lead just a few weeks ago has now shrunk to the point where his title hopes are genuinely under threat. The Australian sits just 14 points ahead of teammate Lando Norris and 40 points clear of Max Verstappen, heading into this weekend's Mexican Grand Prix, which means any one of these three drivers could realistically win the championship depending on how the final 5 races play out. The problem for Piastri is that his performance has dropped significantly over the last 10 races, and the United States Grand Prix last weekend was particularly bad, with the McLaren driver finishing 5th while struggling with confidence throughout the entire weekend. He was nearly 0.3 of a second slower than Norris in qualifying, crashed out of the sprint race at the first corner, and looked uncomfortable in the car from the moment practice started on Friday, which is a worrying sign when there are only 5 races left to turn things around. What makes this situation so concerning is that the numbers tell a clear story about Piastri's decline in form, because in the first 9 races of the season he won 5 times and took 4 pole positions, which is the kind of dominant performance that builds championship leads. But over the last 10 races, he's only won twice and taken 1 pole position, which shows a massive drop in performance that's allowed both Norris and Verstappen to close the gap and put real pressure on his championship lead. The gap to Norris in qualifying at Austin was 0.283 seconds, which is huge when these two drivers are normally separated by hundredths of a second. And what's even more worrying is that Piastri usually manages to catch up to his teammate during a race weekend, even if he starts slowly. That pattern completely disappeared in Austin, where Piastri was slower than Norris in every single session and never found the rhythm he needed to be competitive, which suggests something more fundamental is going wrong rather than just having a bad weekend. Piastri himself admitted after qualifying that his laps were maybe not the best laps of my life, and that he was struggling to get into a rhythm on a bumpy track that requires a lot of confidence to push the car to its limits. The circuit of the Americas has a mix of big braking zones and high-speed corners over bumps, and if you don't have confidence in the car, then you're going to lose time in multiple places, which is exactly what happened to Piastri throughout the weekend. McLaren team principal Andrea Stella explained after the race that the lap time at Austin comes from taking the car to the limit of locking all 4 brakes, and if a driver doesn't have the confidence to do that, then they're going to be significantly slower. Stella said that Piastri was missing the rhythm and confidence needed to lean on the limit, which is a polite way of saying that the championship leader is struggling with the psychological side of pushing a Formula One car when the pressure is at its highest. The technical side of Piastri's struggles seems to be related to the McLaren's tricky front axle, which doesn't always give drivers the best feeling and can make it difficult to commit through fast corners and over bumps. Piastri has generally dealt with this better than Norris throughout 2025, but at Austin, the car's underlying issues came back to haunt him, and he couldn't find a way to work around them like he has at other tracks earlier in the season. What makes this even more difficult for Piastri is that McLaren has confirmed they won't be bringing any more upgrades to the car for the rest of 2025, which means he's stuck with the current specification and needs to figure out how to get the most out of it, rather than waiting for the team to develop their way out of the problem. The lack of development seems to be affecting Piastri more than Norris, with some people suggesting that the current car setup suits Norris's driving style better, which would explain why the gap between them has been growing over recent races. Norris uses a slightly different front suspension configuration that's aimed at giving better feeling to deal with the McLaren's tricky front end, and while Piastri hasn't felt the need to try this setup before, it could be helping Norris handle tracks like Austin better. The problem is that even if Piastri wanted to make changes now, there's limited time to experiment with only 5 races remaining, and any setup changes come with risks when you're trying to protect a championship lead. The sprint weekend format at Austin didn't help Piastri either, because it meant only 1 practice session before going straight into sprint qualifying, which gave him less time to find his rhythm and build confidence in the car. Then, when the sprint race came around, he crashed at the first corner after turning into Nico Hülkenberg's Sauber and getting launched into Norris, which cost him valuable laps that would have been more useful for learning than they would have been for Norris, who was already comfortable with the car. Media outlets have started calling Piastri insecure and suggesting that a major flaw has been exposed under the pressure of leading a championship fight for the first time. This is Piastri's first real title battle in Formula One, and he's learning how to handle that kind of pressure while it's actually happening, which is very different from Norris and Verstappen, who both have experience of fighting for championships and know how to manage the mental side of close title fights. Every mistake gets bigger when you're leading a championship, and the errors we've seen from Piastri lately suggest he's feeling that weight, which means the next 5 races will test whether he has the mental strength to handle this situation, or whether the pressure will continue to affect his performance. It's one thing to be fast when you're chasing and have nothing to lose, but it's completely different to maintain that speed when you're the one being chased, and every point matters. What's interesting is that Piastri is publicly downplaying his struggles, saying after Austin that his performance drop is no major concern, and that he just needs to get back into his rhythm. But the reality is that the numbers tell a very different story, because a driver who's won 5 of the first 9 races shouldn't suddenly be finishing 5th and struggling to match his teammates' pace. And McLaren management has been seen checking over Piastri's car after races to make sure everything is working properly, which suggests even the team is confused about where the performance has gone. This weekend's Mexican Grand Prix becomes absolutely crucial for Piastri because he needs to show that Austin was just a bad weekend rather than the start of a bigger collapse. If he can bounce back and put in a strong performance in Mexico, then the championship is still very much within his reach with 14 points in hand over Norris and 40 over Verstappen. But if the struggles continue and he loses more ground, then the pressure will only increase and his championship lead could disappear very quickly. The mathematics still favour Piastri on paper, with 141 points available across the final 5 races and 2 more sprint weekends coming up, but mathematics don't account for momentum and confidence, both of which are currently working against him. Verstappen has won 3 of the last 4 races and looks like he's getting stronger, as Red Bull continues to find improvements, while Norris is also in good form and closing the gap race by race. What Piastri needs to do is figure out how to adapt his driving to the current car specification, because McLaren isn't going to change their approach with 5 races to go, which means he has to find the solutions himself rather than waiting for the team to fix things. Andrea Stella mentioned that Piastri needs to improve how he challenges the car in low grip conditions and over bumps, which suggests there's a driving technique aspect to this that Piastri will need to work on if he wants to get back to his early season form. The next 5 races will determine whether Piastri can handle the pressure of a championship fight and adapt to a difficult situation, or whether his lack of experience in this kind of battle will cost him what should have been a comfortable title win. Right now, the momentum is with his rivals, the confidence seems to be missing, and the clock is ticking on his championship dream, which makes Mexico this weekend one of the most important races of his career so far.